My dad has a box that brings people back to life, and it has made him rich. The box had the power to bring people back from the dead, and it had made my dad very rich. This is going to be yours one day, so you need to listen and pay attention to everything I say and do. The box was a plain maple box with no markings, but it had a smell which was hard to describe. It smelled like something from my childhood, sweet like cotton candy or freshly made waffles. The clients were siblings who never got to be by their father's bedside when he passed. They lived overseas, and it was too late by the time they made it back. All they wanted to do was say goodbye to him one more time, and they were willing to pay a lot to do it. For the box to work, my dad would place a recent photo, the clothes the deceased were wearing when they died, and a precious personal item into the box. "We brought what you asked us to bring," they said. They handed my father a picture of the siblings and their father, which was taken the last time they were all together before he died. They then handed him a gold watch, which they said he had since he was a young man, and never took off his hand. My dad placed the items in the box, along with what he was wearing the day he died. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I could feel the beating of my heart as we stood there waiting in silence. Suddenly, a tapping sound could be heard coming at first, but when he saw the smiling faces of his kids, his eyes lit up. They spent the next 2 hours alone in a room together. I watched as my dad kept a close eye on my watch. "Why do they only get 2 hours?" I asked. "It's the rules, son," my father said abruptly. My father ushered the brother and sister of the dead man from the room. They looked devastated having to say goodbye, but at least they got to finally say it. My first experience with the dead was a strange moment for me. It was terrifying, but also kind of sweet. It was seeing the faces of the grieving families light up as they got to hug their dearly departed one more time. When it comes to the death of a child, parents would empty their bank accounts for a chance to hug their child one last time. The grief-stricken couple had traveled from the other side of the world. The pain of losing their child from a freak accident was etched into their faces. "Did you bring what I asked you to?" my dad softly asked. "This was his favorite toy. He never went anywhere without it," explained the woman. My dad placed all the items in the box before ushering the couple into another. Everyone waited with nervous apprehension. Suddenly, the smell of warm memories filled the room as the box started to shake. My dad walked over and took as his parents embraced him. My dad kept a "I hate this part," said my dad with a sullen look on his face. When we entered the room, the smell of a newborn baby was replaced by the stench of rotten meat. The boy's radiant blue eyes were now black as coal and his face deathly pale. "We explained the rules, Mrs. Jefferson. It's time," my dad said, as he quickly ushered the boy's crying parents from the room. My dad left me alone in the room with the boy. I watched in horror as the boy screamed in immense pain as his bones contorted and snapped. I remembered the boy's parents telling us he died from multiple fractures when a bookcase in the family home fell on him. The boy's face contorted in agony as he began to crawl unnaturally towards me. My body went stiff with fear as his hands pulled on the end of my jeans. All I wanted to do was scream, but I couldn't make a sound. Suddenly, my dad ran into the room and pulled the dead boy off me. The whole process didn't sit right with me. Watching that poor boy squirm in agony was a sight I never wanted to see again. After the parents had left, my dad picked up the boy as he cried for his parents and carried him from the room. The serious expression on his face. "You have to promise one thing. When I die someday, you will never bring me back." Something didn't sit right about the whole process, and I was starting to think my dad wasn't the good person I always thought him to be. A sense of dread crept up my spine as the smell of death hit me. He handed me the keys to the door as the dead boy in his arms continued to wail in agony. My hands were shaking with fear as I placed the key in the lock. I slowly opened the door, and the sound of agonizing screams was deafening. The room was filled with hundreds of moaning and wailing corpses, some calling out for their loved ones. "It doesn't feel right to just bury them," he said, as he flung the dead boy like discarded rubbish into the pile of the living dead.